Scholars,
Clement was writing in AD 96, well before anything was canonized. AD
Right.
96, well before anything was canonized.
Yes, First Clement was written in 95, and that's where it's mentioned in that book. And it's not we're not entirely certain that Clement actually wrote First Clement, but it's just assumed that he is. But when he wrote that, he's the one that traditionally associates Paul's death occurring before the end of Nero's reign, which would have been before 68 CE, or around right at 68 CE at the latest. So Paul died before the first gospel came out. And it seems like, based on the circumstances described in the pastoral epistles, those are happening later in the end of the first century.
That is absolute nonsense. The late dating of the Gospels, including the Gospel of John, is a lot earlier than what you're saying. It's only skeptical atheists who will give very late datings to the Gospels. You know, for goodness sake, I've given you a pre-Pauline creed that was in wide circulation orally between AD 30 and AD 35 that has been dated by secular and Christian historians.
And when I asked you for proof, you can't even identify it in your list of citations. I'd be happy to take a look at it.
An increasing number of exceptionally influential scholars have very recently concluded that at least the teachings of the resurrection, and perhaps even the specific formulation of the pre-Pauline creedal tradition in 1 Corinthians 15 verses 3 through 8 dates to AD 30. In other words, there never was a time when the message of Jesus' resurrection was not an integral part of the earliest apostolic proclamation. No less a scholar than James Dunn even states regarding this crucial text, this tradition, we can be entirely confident, was formulated as tradition within months of Jesus' death.
Go tell them the women are terrified and they don't tell anybody. And that's the end of the account.
There's a supposition here that I want to mention. The idea is that the Gospel of Mark is the earliest, and since there are no appearances, we're in trouble. Tim's not necessarily saying that, but others have said that. First of all, I want to say Mark does have an appearance, maybe more. He says, go tell the disciples and Peter. Some scholars think that that's an intimation of the appearance to Peter earlier, but be that as it may, Mark specifically says he's been raised. But the additional point I'd like to make here, and then I'll see what he says, is his point that Paul predates Mark by 15 or 20 years, and Paul has the longest list of appearances.
Except that Paul just basically gives kind of a summary. He doesn't give a blow-by-blow appearances.
First of all, Tim, if Paul has a summary here, as you just said, you said all we have is a summary in Paul. I want to know what's wrong with the summary. He gives a long list of appearances. If he gives more appearances than any other disciple, I want to know what's wrong with the good list from right on top of the events. If he received this material in 35 AD, if two of the disciples, well, I'm using the dating of the critics. I'll give you a list of them, but these are people who are atheists and people who do not agree with evangelicals, and they put it in the 30s AD. So if Paul only, quote, has a summary, I'll take that summary, because we can make a case based on that summary alone. It's excellent evidence.
Let me put it this way. If you reject Christ, then the moment you take your first step through the gates of hell, the only thing you will hear is all of creation standing to its feet and applauding and praising God because God has rid the earth of you.
I take full responsibility for my going to hell or heaven.